Shalom. I would like to discuss a midrash and a Hasidic teaching upon which it is based that's connected to Rosh HaShana. The midrash says in Kohelet Rabbah, Amar B'Yavo, Haya HaKadosh Baruch Hu Boneh Olamot Umachrivan, Borei Olamot Umachrivan, Ad Shebarat Elu, V'Amar Dein Hanyan Li, Yaton Lo Hanyan Li. The picture that's painted here is one in which God constantly creates and destroys worlds until finally he arrives at the conclusion that this world is the best of all possible worlds, and this is the one which he capriciously endorses, and the previous ones which are destroyed are ones which he did not find favor in his eyes. Now, the picture that arises from this midrash is very different than the picture we generally have of creation, especially in the Middle Ages, where there was a lot of talk and discussion around the world being created, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. Here, the world is ancient. It is, in a sense, eternally ancient. The midrash describes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu boneh olamot umachrivan, and it repeats it again, borei olamot umachrivan. He creates worlds and he destroys them. He creates worlds and he destroys them. The midrash repeats it so that we get a sense of feeling together with the midrash, feeling in the process of creation and destruction. So the world, in a sense, as portrayed in the midrash, didn't come out of nothing. It was always in process of creation and destruction. What does this mean for us? Because the midrash is talking about God and the creation of the world. But what does that mean for us? So I want to share two teachings. The first of the Sefer Sod Yesharim of Gershon Henoch Miradzin, and the second teaching of the Beit Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Leiner Miradzin. So the Sod Yesharim says, I'll share my screen so you can see the source. So the Sod Yesharim says, to the source here on the right, on the pasuk Hashem Pagad et Sarah. This is, of course, from the Torah reading of Rosh HaShana, and God remembered Sarah. Ita Bagmara, it says in the Gemara, Kiman matzliinan ha'idna, ze hayom tchilat ma'asecha, zikaron liyom rishon. According to whom do we pray today that this day, namely Rosh HaShana, is the day which commemorates or is a memory of the first day? Because, of course, there's a dispute whether the world was created in Nisan or was created in Tishrei, and the Gemara, so to speak, paskins, the Gemara decides that based on the formulation of our prayers, we say that the day of creation was on Rosh HaShana. So what does this mean? V'ha'inyan ki b'chol shana b'zeh hayom me'orer ha'ma'amar yihi or. Ki b'chol shana nitchazek v'nitbaseis ha'olam b'yeter se'et. So he says that every year at this time, the light of creation shines. Now this assumes a certain view of time, whereas normally we think of time as being linear, namely one event following another, connected by some sort of causality, where each event is unique, never to return. So in that sense, time does not have meaning. It just happens. Whereas the time which is being portrayed here is time which is circular. The Rosh Hashanah has eternal meaning because we're always going back to the first time, to the time of Yehi Or. That's the nature of the day connects back, like through a wormhole, so to speak, to the light of Yehi Or. Ki b'chol shana nitchazek v'nitbaseis ha'olam b'yeter se'et. Because every year there's an unfolding of creation, which is reinforced again and again by the reappearance of the light of creation on Rosh HaShana. V'hashana she'avra. So how do we? So that's from Aleph Tishrei, from the first day of Tishrei. So what happens to this year, to the previous year? So we said, V'hashana she'avra nechshav neged shana zo kimo almin de'itcharvu shaya kodem briat ha'olam. So he says the previous year compared to the new year is like the worlds which were destroyed prior to creation. And then he quotes the Midrash, Kede'ita b'Midrash, Shaya Kadosh Baruch Hu boneh olamot umachrivan, ad shebara olam hazeh, v'amar dein hanyan li, yaton lo hanyan li. So he's taking the story of creation and he's saying, let's move that to the present and in a sense collapse time, is we're going in a circle. We're going back to the original time. And we're saying that Rosh Hashanah is Yehi Or. But what was before that? Now, in general, I just want to pause for a second. There could be a temptation that when we talk about Rosh Hashanah and Day of Creation and the fact that we view creation as being something from nothing. So there was nothing before. So we say we have this power to renew ourselves, to be born for the first time so that we get a fresh start, right? And the rituals around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim, some of the rituals we do reinforce that. The idea of Hatarat Nedarim, of the abolition of vows, means there's nothing that binds me from before. So something that's a totally new start, or Kol Nidre, right? So we're cutting off the past and we're starting again. That's what the Or of Yehi Or is. But what he's saying here is a much more sober view of humanity and I think of creation. Namely, it's nice to talk about a fresh start, but we always enter the new year with baggage from the old year. So the question is, how do we relate to that? So he's saying that the previous year we relate to as the worlds which were destroyed in creation. Now, how am I supposed to relate to the parts of me from last year, so to speak, that were destroyed? So now I want to go to the Sefer Beit Yaakov. So he also talks about this midrash. He says as follows. I'm going to share my screen again. So the Beit Yaakov says, "Bereshit bara Elohim." Ita b'midrash. He quotes the same midrash. Ita b'midrash Rabbah. Shaya Kadosh Baruch Hu boneh olamot umachrivan. God created worlds and destroyed them. Then I'm skipping down a little bit, and he says that this is equivalent to, he says, Ki yesh divrei Torah, she'ein adam omed alehem, ela im kain nichshal bahem. There are words of the Torah which people cannot firmly understand. Ein adam omed alehem, person doesn't really absorb them and interiorize them unless they experienced some sort of failure in that regard. Ein adam omed al divrei Torah, ela im kain nichshal bahem. And he's quoting this, talking about God in the process of creation. So we have a very different picture of God here. It's not God the way, if you, Lahavdil, talk about Yul Brenner in the Ten Commandments of so it shall be written and so it shall be done. Creation as an expression of the capricious divine power, infinite power that God has. But rather, Ein Adam Omed al Divrei Torah Elen Kenichshal Bahem. God will not succeed to firmly create unless he went through a process of failure. That's the juxtaposition that the Beit Yaakov is doing here. He's taking the Midrash and he's making it very personal. The Midrash is talking about the creation of the world and God. What he does, he says, he's talking about creation and God, but he says it's like human beings where we cannot create unless we go through a process of failure. It's not that failure is something which you have to get past. He's saying failure is an integral part of the process of creation. It's almost like two sides of the same coin. And then he goes on to say as follows. Lachein, he says, shehayu b'tchilat olamot shenechravu, ad she Hashem yitbarach bara olam hazeh, v'amar dein hanyali. Right, the worlds were destroyed until God said, "This is the one that I approve of." And then he takes it home. He says as follows: Ki kol briat ha'olam, all of creation, nirmaz b'nefesh ha'adam, is alluded to in the soul of a person. That means that when we talk about creation, we think perhaps that what we're talking about is the exterior world. We're talking about heaven and earth and the plants and the stars and the sun and the moon. So that's only one aspect of the story. It's one layer of the story, but all the elements of that story are, in a sense, projections of what's going on inside human beings. Ki kol briat ha'olam nirmaz b'nefesh ha'adam. So if we have, let's talk about some Kabbalistic concepts. If we talk about tzimtzum, right, divine withdrawal. So what he's saying is God, right, in divine withdrawal or concentration, God, in order to create, has to give space for the world. So the first act of creation is withdrawal, to make space for the other. But that's b'nefesh ha'adam, because for me to have a relationship with someone else, I have to withdraw, to give the other person space, to see them not merely as an extension of myself, but to try to see them as who they are. So that's nefesh ha'adam. Or if you talk about the creation of yesh me'ayin, talk about creation, something from nothing. So we talk about the world being created out of nothing. But think of how we create as human beings and how ideas may pop into our heads and we say, it came into my head out of nowhere. Right? So that's bria yesh me'ayin. That's a creation, something from nothing. Because the original concept you experienced as entering into you out of nowhere. So that's what he means when he says, Ki kol briat ha'olam nirmaz b'nefesh ha'adam. And now he's going to take it to this midrash. So if the entire creation is alluded to in nefesh ha'adam, in the soul of a human being, what are those destroyed worlds about? So what are the worlds which were destroyed? What are they? Nirmaz b'nefesh ha'adam alev nishbar al michshol shenichshal bo. They the destroyed worlds are the part of us that we feel devastated about, of the failures and the catastrophes that we may have experienced in the previous year. So the previous year are the worlds which are destroyed. The worlds which are destroyed are not exterior worlds to us. They are inside of us. Right? This is a much more realistic view of how we move from one year to the next. We can't, and according to this, we even shouldn't leave it all behind us. What we have to do is leverage what was last year. Leverage those failures, because Ein Adam Omed al Divrei Torah Ela Kein Nechshal Behem. We have to leverage those failures, and according to the level of those, the depths of those failures, that creates the energy for moving forward. Right? So he says, Nirmaz b'nefesh ha'adam alev nishbar al michshol shenichshal bo ve'al yado through this failure, through the catastrophe, Ba'al Divrei Torah. That's how the words of Torah, and what he means here, of course, in broadly speaking, is revelation, understanding God, understanding ourselves. Ba'al Divrei Torah. Then those higher levels of consciousness can be achieved on a firm basis because we utilized last year's catastrophes. Okay? And then he goes to Gan Eden and he says, Kamo shekatuv ve'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz. A vapor rises from the land. Okay? And what is that vapor? What is the aid? Hainu hatza'aka me'almin de'itcharvu. The vapors which rise after the destruction. Again, if we read the story of Gan Eden, it's the first time there was a Gan Eden. There was no destruction beforehand. But the reading here is that the world is ancient. And the story of our story of Bereshit sits on many infinite previous Bereshits. So what's rising from the earth is the Sa'aka, is the crying out of the creations which were destroyed. Think of it this way. Think of ground zero at Hiroshima and think of the smoldering vapors which are rising. So he says that's the Tza'aka. That's the crying out of the previous worlds which were destroyed. And then he says that you require a hitorut lemata before the hitorut lemala. You require this crying out from anguish. You require that before you can have a revelation from above. And only after that, now he's going back to the Gan Eden story, after the vapors of which survive the destruction and which we experience as anguish and crying out, after they rise, ulevatar, and afterwards, v'hishka et kol pnei ha'adama. From the vapors, they turn into rain, and that rain fertilizes the earth. So what we take with us from the previous year, from before the Bet of Bereshit, from before creation, is the meaning of the destroyed worlds, the kernel of truth and authenticity, which comes to us in the form of crying out over a destruction, over a national destruction, over calamity, and over our personal devastations that we may have endured. That tza'aka to God becomes the basis which carries over into the new world, into the world of creation, and the world of tikkun, the world which is perfected. I wish everyone k'tiva v'chatima tova, and of course, a healthy year. We say it all the time, but it has special meaning today. K'tiva v'chatima tova.